Hi guys, I'm Rick. Before we start, subscribe to the channel and leave your like, because today's video is going to be insane. The story begins intensely. A man is undergoing extreme training, being pushed to his limits. Every blow, every movement brings him closer to his physical and mental limits. The fear of not surviving this journey is on his face. But, watching from a distance, a group of researchers follow his progress closely. They see the improvements he has made over the years and happily conclude that the E-Rank promotion test will not be a challenge for him. Soon afterwards, registration for the long-awaited E-Rank test begins. Among the candidates is Rick, our protagonist. When he arrives to register, he is greeted by Alyssa, the guild's receptionist. She greets him enthusiastically, surprised to see him again after 2 years. The last time they met, Rick was still a simple guild worker. Alyssa is surprised to discover that Rick has become an adventurer, especially as he is already 30 years old. Starting an adventuring career at that age is almost unimaginable. Most adventurers start as F-rank apprentices in their teens and reach E-rank in about 2 years. Curious about what Rick has been up to, Alyssa asks where he's been all this time. Rick replies that he has spent the last 2 years training in the mountains under the guidance of experienced adventurers. In the middle of the conversation, everyone's attention is diverted by a drunk man who tries to approach Alyssa in a disrespectful manner. Without thinking twice, Rick intervenes and resolves the situation with ease. The incident draws the attention of everyone in the place, and Rick takes the opportunity to remind everyone around, "Remember to drink in moderation." With the situation under control, Alyssa hands Rick the ticket for the E-Rank exam and wishes him good luck with the test. After receiving his ticket for the E-Rank test, Rick couldn't help but feel a little worried. The number on his ticket was 4,242, a number that seemed to have a useless and even unlucky meaning. Outside, he meets a girl called Rionette and informs her that he has finished registering for the test. She, however, quickly pulls him back to reality, reminding Rick to pay attention to where his eyes were focused. Back at the guild, something unexpected happens. Everyone in the hall is surprised to see a handprint left on the iron armor of the drunk Rick had calmed down moments before. And that's not all. The armor is not ordinary. It belongs to Domo, a very famous former E-Rank adventurer known as the Fiendish Knight, who also has a long list of crimes to his name. The strength required to leave a mark on iron armor is something that many can't even imagine. Alyssa, shocked, begins to wonder, has Rick really become so strong that he can do this with ease? Over time, Rick moves on to the stages of the test. First, his height is measured, and the examiners are even more surprised to discover that he is 32 years old. For them, it's unusual to see someone of that age taking part in a promotion test for adventurers. Then, the magical energy test begins. Participants place their hands on a crystal ball to measure their power. Some candidates receive moderate results, such as D, while one girl surprises with a grade of C+. Then it's Rick's turn. When he touches the crystal, the light generated is weak, almost non-existent. He gets an Fe, the lowest possible grade. The other participants look at Rick with pity, wishing they didn't end up like him. Rick walks away, trying to process what has happened, but suddenly something unexpected occurs. The crystal he touched breaks. The examiner stares in shock, unable to understand what really happened. The next exam puts the participants to the test in a more physical way. They have to strike a device designed to measure the force of their blows. This device, known as the Emerald Bag, is designed to absorb incredibly powerful attacks, so the participants are warned that they don't need to hold back. A glimpse into Rick's past reveals the rigorous training he underwent, where he learned that the human body is the true basis of a good fighter, regardless of the weapons or magic one may have. Rick was taught to destroy the emerald sack with his bare hands. His mentor explained that by succeeding in breaking it, Rick would have built a body that he could trust completely. However, this was no ordinary sack. The emerald sack is as tough as a dragon's teeth, something that seemed impossible to Rick at first glance. At the time, Rick doubted that he would be able to accomplish such a feat, but his mentor reassured him that it was something an experienced adventurer could do with ease. He even showed some of his own power, destroying 200 bags with a single movement. Since then, Rick has been instructed to hit the emerald sack 50,000 times a day, a grueling training that has put his body to the test. Back in the present, the exam continues, and one of the participants impresses everyone by attacking the bag with a powerful strengthening magic, leaving the spectators in awe. Soon after, a small boy steps forward, declaring that the time has finally come to show his strength. He's not just anyone, he's the Duke's second son, and rumor has it that, despite being only 11 years old, he possesses the magical power of a C-rank adventurer. The boy prodigy begins to prepare his attack with great confidence, and his combat equipment displays an impressive show of power. When the attack finally takes place, the result is surprising. A small fireball is launched. But despite the modest size, the damage caused by the attack is devastating, leaving everyone around in shock. People start calling him a genius, impressed by the destructive power that the small attack has generated. Rick was also surprised by the boy's skill, who used a level 3 composite strengthening spell linked to nature. This reminded him of his own training, where he had faced a devastating fire attack from a small boy. Although both attacks were empowering, they were noticeably different. Rick began to wonder if the boy had compressed his magic to work better in an enclosed environment. Soon it was Rick's turn to take the test. The examiner, however, doesn't expect great results. He reminds Rick that if magic isn't trained from a young age, the chances of developing it later are practically nil. Considering Rick's poor performance in the previous test, the examiner suggests that he give up. Rick somewhat agrees with the examiner's reasoning, but can't ignore the time and effort he has put into his training. Rick recalls the exhausting days of training when he felt physically and mentally drained, but he never gave up. He knew he had a late start on his journey as an adventurer, but he never believed that age should be an obstacle. Determined, Rick prepares himself and, in a single blow, completely destroys the emerald sack, shocking everyone present. Rick, however, is left in doubt. He wonders if the bag was defective, so surprised by his own strength. The crowd, on the other hand, is terrified, not knowing who this man really is. The boy who had impressed them earlier is furious, believing that Rick has stolen his attention, but he decides that he will have his chance to shine in the next test of defensive skill. Soon after, Rick shocks everyone again by blocking a level 4 compound spell, something the boy prodigy was unable to do. The examiner, impressed, asks Rick how he managed to block such a strong attack using only a level 1 defense spell. Intrigued, the examiner decides to increase the challenge and uses a level 5 attack spell. He suggests that Rick use something stronger than his basic defense. However, Rick surprises everyone again by revealing that he only knows how to use level 1 magic, both for attack and defense. Even so, he assures the examiner that he'll be fine. The examiner, still skeptical, walks away, convinced that Rick is underestimating the difficulty of the next challenge. The examiner decides not to hold back his strength and starts casting his magic. He launches a powerful level 5 attack, surprising everyone around with its immense power. Even some night warriors in the distance were shocked by what they saw. This examiner's name is Sylvester, and he quickly rushes into the arena, incredulous that such a strong attack was used in a simple exam. Upon arriving, Sylvester searches for information about Rick and discovers that he managed to block the level 5 attack using only a level 1 defense spell. At first, he believes that this must all be some kind of joke, but he is quickly informed that there is no mistake. Rick, a 32-year-old adventurer, was able to accomplish such a feat. Rick's report reveals that he worked for 13 years as a receptionist for a guild, which leaves Sylvester even more intrigued. He has no idea what a receptionist does, but he begins to wonder if Rick's title could only be given to someone who has defeated a dragon. After the written exam, Rick feels confident that he has done a good job. But then he is approached by Freed, the boy wonder who is visibly annoyed. Rick barely remembers him and, seeing him furious, assumes that the boy is lost. and offers to help him find his parents. Fried, however, is furious that Rick stole all the attention during the test. Before Rick can react, Angelica, Fried's older sister, shows up, angry that Rick has made her brother cry. Fried, confused and still upset, says that the 40-year-old man beat everyone in the exam. Annoyed by the comment, Rick immediately corrects him, saying that he's only 30. Angelica, however, believes her brother and challenges Rick to a duel. Rick, surprised, just points out that she knocked his glasses off. But Rionette soon explains to him that, in the kingdom, picking up the glasses means formally accepting the challenge. It's not long before the two are in the arena, ready to duel. Angelica declares that she must punish the old man. In the kingdom, duels allow each participant to propose a condition for the loser. Angelica suggests that the loser must serve Victor until the end of his life, a condition that Fried supports enthusiastically. She reveals that she is a second-class knight, which surprises Rick. This means that Angelica has the same level of skill as a B-rank adventurer, making the duel much more serious than Rick expected. B-rank adventurers are known for their ability to defeat monsters single-handedly, which makes them incredibly powerful. Even so, Rionette tries to calm Rick down, reminding him not to panic. Rick, however, believes she is wrong, pointing out that he is only an F-rank adventurer, registered a few days ago. He fears that this duel could cost him his life. Rionette, for her part, reassures him, telling him to trust the training he has undergone over the last 2 years. At that moment, Rick is flooded with memories of his grueling training, where every day was a fight against his own limits. Although the memory inspires him, he also remembers how difficult it was, and, for a moment, feels like giving up. Rionette urges him to be more confident, reminding him that he was trained by the Orichalcum Fist, the strongest group of warriors on the continent. For them, Rick is considered one of the members, and this makes him regain some of his confidence. Rick thanks Rionette for restoring his resolve and prepares to face Angelica. She, for her part, is aware that Rick is an F rank and therefore promises not to take the fight to extremes. Even so, Rick realizes that she is the kind of knight who strengthens both her body and her weapons, which makes her a formidable opponent. Angelica, curious to see if Rick can keep up, surprises him by using her incredible speed to move towards him. Rick, shocked by her speed, remains silent, not knowing how to react. Angelica's brother, Fried, watches the scene with a smug smile, commenting that his sister is known as the Flash because of her impressive speed. Angelica then declares that she's not going to hold back any longer and launches into another extremely fast attack. However, Rick remains calm. What seems like an incredibly fast move to everyone else, he perceives as slow. He wonders why anyone would call her Flash if she moves so slowly in his eyes. Rick lands a blow with ease, but Angelica believes it was just luck, as only first-class knights can react properly to his speed. Convinced that Rick won't be able to dodge again, Angelica prepares for a second attack. Rick is once again impressed by the slowness of her movements. He begins to question whether Angelica achieved her position by merit or whether it was through some kind of favoritism. For a brief moment, Rick even considers the possibility that she might actually be strong, but then laughs it off as unlikely. When Angelica leaps towards him again, Rick prepares for another confrontation. Rick barely manages to dodge Angelica's clumsy attack, and yet he doesn't fully realize what has happened. Unable to read her movements correctly, Rick assumes that the attack was an impressive display of skill. This reminds him that, after all, he is only an F-rank adventurer, and that there is a huge difference in skill between him and a second-rate knight like Angelica. Angelica, on the other hand, realizes that she missed the blow, but decides to pretend that it was intentional. Determined to win, she declares that she will attack again, and this time she will move even faster. Her next attack will be so powerful that she can only use it 3 times. When she advances, supposedly faster than before, Rick still sees her movements as slow. Even so, he remains cautious, fearing that another unexpected attack could come at him at any moment. He moves carefully, worried that any mistake could be fatal. Angelica, for her part, begins to feel uncomfortable. She realizes that Rick is avoiding her attacks more easily than she expected. Now, there are only 2 of his special moves left, and she knows she can't afford to waste them. Determined, Angelica uses her last 2 attacks in quick succession. It's then that Rick realizes that he needs to counterattack. When Angelica advances one last time, Rick prepares to strike back. Angelica's attack is impressive, but to Rick, it still looks like a poorly executed technique. He believes that if he's not careful, his counterattack might not arrive in time. However, when the dust settles and the shadows dissipate, everyone present is shocked to see the devastating impact of Rick's attack. A huge crater has opened up on the floor of the arena. Angelica, completely stunned, realizes that if she hadn't dodged at the last second, Rick's blow would have been catastrophic. For his part, Rick believes that Angelica purposely threw herself to the ground to dodge his attack. Confused, Angelica wonders who this man really is. Rick, without any arrogance, explains that he is just an F-rank adventurer who, 2 years ago, was a receptionist at a guild. He admits that he's not sure of his own capabilities and that he doesn't know how much he can do against a second-rate knight. However, Rick is determined to do his best during the duel, seeing it as an opportunity to learn and grow. Rick enthusiastically prepares to continue the fight, but is surprised to see that Angelica is even more shocked than he is. Freed, her brother, also looks incredulous, and Angelica decides that this time she's going to let Rick win. Trying to get out of the situation as quickly as possible, she starts to walk away, but Rick reminds her of the conditions of the duel. He hadn't proposed anything, but agrees to accept the conditions she suggests. Angelica, unwilling to be forced to serve him for the rest of her life, begs at his feet to find the strength and flees the arena. Rick, however, doesn't consider this a real victory. Rionette then approaches Rick, reminding him that the results of the preliminary test are about to be announced. Rick barely has time to react, as he is soon shocked when Rionette reveals that the other members of the group are on their way. Stunned, Rick doesn't understand the reason for this unexpected visit. Rionette explains that they want to see what Rick has been up to lately. A feeling of unease grows in Rick. He knows that something is about to happen, but unfortunately, it's too late. The others are on their way, and Rick can't shake the feeling that this might not end well. We then learn about a legendary hero who tried to defeat the final monster, known as the Kaiser. The reward for this feat would be a treasure capable of granting any wish. However, the hero failed in his mission, but believed that, one day, an adventurer would be able to defeat the monster and claim the treasure. Back in the present, Rick and the other participants are told that the results of the test will be revealed soon. They must wait for their mana cards to arrive. If the card glows blue, they have passed. Those who pass will take part in a mock battle as part of the second phase of the exam. Rionette notices that Rick is nervous and encourages him to be more confident. Their friendship is so strong that Rick jokingly thinks he wishes he were 10 years younger so he could marry her. Rionette, on the other hand, doesn't seem worried about the results of the test. She says that if Rick fails, she will simply triple her training. Rick, terrified at the thought, is relieved when his card glows blue, indicating that he has passed. Happy to have passed, Rick is nevertheless distracted by a terrible smell in the air. It is then that a nobleman called Raster introduces himself, praising Rionette's beauty. Rick tries to be polite and introduce himself, but Raster ignores him, saying that he has no interest in talking to a middle-aged man like Rick. Raster then makes a romantic innuendo, saying that he has left something behind, his feelings of love for Rionette's eyes. He expresses his desire to have her as his wife, but Rick quickly intervenes, declaring that Rionette is his girlfriend. Raster ridicules him for being an F-rank adventurer at his age, but Rick returns the comment, suggesting that Raster looks at least 25. Raster angrily reveals that he achieved E rank at 14 and is now an A rank, as well as being one of the examiners for the second phase of the exam. He tries to convince Rionette to leave Rick, but everyone is surprised when she rejects Raster and confirms that she is dating Rick. Rionette further humiliates him by pointing out that his perfume is repulsive, and Rick realizes that Raster is the source of the bad smell. Humiliated, Raster tells Rick to hope he's not his examiner. Afterwards, Rick apologizes to Rionette for making up that she was his girlfriend, but surprisingly, she doesn't mind. In fact, she's happy that Rick helped get her out of that situation. Meanwhile, Raster begins to hate Rick and vows to make him pay. We discover that Freed and Angelica are Raster's siblings, and they complain to him about the old man who tormented them. This only increases Raster's anger, and he vows never to forgive the man who made his brothers cry. They inform Raster of Rick's exam number, and Raster begins to hatch a malicious plan. The next day, Rionette reminds Rick to control his strength during the simulation battle, but he doesn't understand the reason for this advice. Soon, a man called Lynx appears and explains that he will be in charge of Rick's test in the second phase. Rick is relieved that Raster won't be his examiner. Lynx comments that it's unusual to see someone in their 30s deciding to become an adventurer. Although Rick thinks Lynx is mocking him, Lynx actually admires his determination. Lynx is a middle-aged man, and something about Rick has inspired him deeply. He notices that Rick has a clear goal that drives him, something rare to see. Rick is impressed to see how much Lynx understands him. Lynx explains that it's because the two of them are more alike than Rick realizes. Lynx began his journey as an adventurer at the age of 25 and is now in his 40s. It took him 20 years to reach B rank, and his dream is still to reach A rank. Rick admires Lynx's determination, who, even after all this time, hasn't given up on his goals. This makes Rick feel even more motivated to take the exam alongside him. The two quickly develop a good friendship and even plan to have a drink together after the exam. However, they don't realize that Raster is eavesdropping on their conversation. When Lynx walks away, he reflects on how well-trained Rick seems, just based on the handshake they shared. This inspires him to keep training even harder. However, his train of thought is interrupted when Raster shows up, wanting to have a chat. Meanwhile, Rionette notices that Rick is in a good mood. However, the news quickly changes the atmosphere. The participants in Rick's group are informed that Lynx has gone mad. Rick initially doesn't recognize the name of the new examiner, until Rionette explains that the replacement is none other than Raster, the perfume man they ran away from the day before. She points out that he probably has connections to the nobility they know, and the other participants regret having Raster as their examiner. Everyone is afraid of Raster, known as the Man of 1,000 Mirrors. He is also called the F-Rank Crusher because he likes to torment the weaker adventurers who catch his eye. Rick is terrified because he has not only attracted Raster's attention, but confronted him directly. Elsewhere, Raster demonstrates his impressive power by defeating one of his own elite guards. Rick begins to panic, worried that he has antagonized someone so powerful. He remembers that he is still only an F rank, with limited knowledge of basic magic, and begins to wish he could go home. However, he knows that if he goes back, his training will be tripled, which makes him realize that he's in a no-win situation. No matter what he does, Rick feels that he is doomed. Rick loses confidence as he is constantly criticized for his age. But Rionette, always confident in him, reminds Rick that he can turn these insults into fuel for his own confidence. Although Rick still feels insecure, Rionette unshakably believes in his strength. She is sure that he can defeat Raster and pass the exam. She has trusted Rick from the moment he decided to become an adventurer, and her words restore Rick's confidence. Soon after, a stranger approaches Rick and calls him "young man." He comments that he can see that Rick is fighting for something and offers a fortune reading. Rick hesitates, but the stranger insists, offering the first reading for free. Unable to resist, Rick accepts. However, Rionette soon notices a magic circle on the chair where Rick is sitting. Suddenly, Rick disappears. The stranger reveals that it was all an act and declares himself to be an excellent actor. Furious, Rionette demands to know where Rick was teleported, but the stranger, called Free, refuses to tell her. Rionette, consumed by rage, demonstrates her devastating power by cutting off all of Free's arms with a single movement. In a state of total panic, Free begs for mercy, but Rionette is merciless and threatens to take out one of his eyes. She even lets him choose which eye he loses. Terrified, Free finally confesses that he can only teleport objects 100 meters away, which means that Rick is nearby. Near Rick, he finds himself outside the exam site, surrounded by a large group of men who look serious and focused. One of them, dressed as a butler, approaches and explains that they are the elite guards of the Dartmouth family, a noble family that has an interest in Rick. The butler warns them that they need Rick to sleep for a while. In other words, they want to prevent him from taking part in the exam. Rick, surprised, realizes that he is being played for a dirty trick by the nobility. He can't believe the family is willing to go to such lengths to get in his way. However, the butler corrects Rick, stating that they're not just hindering him, they're fighting him. The butler even reveals that many of them have powers equivalent to B and A rank adventurers. Faced with this revelation, Rick realizes that he has no chance of winning the fight. Just then, a group appears, and Rick is surprised and relieved to recognize that they are the senior members of his team. They ask why Rick is away from the exam site, as he should be competing. The guards, meanwhile, are shocked to see that one of Rick's team members, a large man who looks like an orca, is present. The guards try to confront the big man, but Rick, fearing for the guard's safety, lies, saying that his friends are just trying to help him relax before the exam. The big man offers to help too, but Rick quickly begs the butler to back off with his men, warning that their lives are in danger. The butler ignores Rick's warnings and orders his men to eliminate everyone. One of the guards tries to attack the orca, but everyone is shocked when the guard's sword breaks when it hits the big man's head, which hasn't moved an inch. The big man then praises the guard for strengthening his body, but suggests that he also strengthen his weapons. Another guard tries to land a blow, but gets his hand broken in the process. Surprisingly, the orca heals the guard immediately, and even offers advice on how he can improve his balance during fights. Meanwhile, the other members of Rick's team can see that he is, as always, in trouble, and decide to intervene to solve the problem. The big man's peaceful solution, however, turns out to be rather extreme when he pulls out a huge gun. He explains that it's his latest invention, a gun that shoots crystals infused with magic. The guards try to attack him, but end up receiving a devastating blow from the gun. Rick, desperate, asks him to stop, fearing he's going too far. The big man, however, believes that Rick wants to try out the weapon, which only increases his concern. The big man's peaceful solution, however, turns out to be rather extreme when he pulls out a huge gun. He explains that it's his latest invention, a gun that shoots crystals infused with magic. The guards try to attack him, but end up receiving a devastating blow from the gun. Rick, desperate, asks him to stop, fearing he's going too far. The big man, however, believes that Rick wants to try out the weapon, which only increases his concern. Just then, one of the guards, with a brilliant idea, decides that the best tactic is to take one of the girls in Rick's group hostage. As he approaches her, Rick is terrified, thinking that the guard has a death wish. Even the orca warns the guard to back off, saying that this won't end well. The girl, for her part, is confused and wonders what the guard is trying to do. Rick tries to calm her down, saying that he just wants to play some kind of game. She believes him and asks what game the guard wants to play, but it soon becomes clear that the man's intentions are far more dangerous. He shoots her, and the girl, now furious, unleashes her true strength. Rick realizes that she is ready to fight. In an instant, she completely destroys the fool who attacked her. The other guards are shocked, as the girl has conjured a level 7 spell linked to nature without even using an incantation. The butler, now terrified, finally recognizes who she is, the famous vampire of magic. She is the most powerful magician at only 10 years old and is known as the daughter of the demon of ruin. Her name is Elisarette, and she's not the only famous person in the group. The blonde boy, who looks very young, is actually over 50. He is a half-elf, half-dwarf, and is the best weapons craftsman in the world, using technology that many believe is 1,000 years ahead of its time. His name is Mizet. As for the orc, he possesses a combination of physical strength and superhuman intelligence. He is also a master of support magic, and his name is Brodston. The guards are incredulous to realize that they are all S-rank adventurers, members of the legendary Orichalcon Fist Guild, a unique group in the world. The butler, who never thought he'd live long enough to see such figures with his own eyes, decides it's time to leave. He plans to spend the rest of his life in peace, and the guards have never seen him so calm before. Meanwhile, Elisareth has fun destroying everyone around her with spells that she utters with a single word. Rick, observing everything, decides that he never wants to train with these insane people again. He vows to do his best to pass the exam and avoid this fate. Back at the exam site, Rionette is still tormenting Freed. Freed, in desperation, wonders how long this will go on, and Rionette simply replies that it will continue until Rick returns. Freed confidently asserts that Rick won't be back, as his family is looking after him. However, he is shocked when Rick casually walks up and greets him with a hello. Rionette quickly throws Freed against a wall, while Rick, confused, wonders what happened to the place. Rionette reassures him that everything is fine and that she only destroyed a small part of the building. Just then, Lynx reappears, explaining that Raster knocked it down. This frightens Rick, as he realizes that Raster did this on purpose to take control of his exam. Lynx confesses to Rick that he shared with Raster his dream of building a school in his hometown, but Raster mocked him, hurting him physically and emotionally. Lynx, powerless in the face of someone as powerful as Raster, now feels it's foolish to have dreams at his age. He fears that Raster will do something much worse to Rick and begs him to abandon the exam. Rick, however, refuses. He declares that he wants everyone to know that it's okay to start making your dreams come true, regardless of your age. Meanwhile, Raster is busy eliminating his own men, and one of the guards informs him that there is an intruder. This makes Raster smile as he realizes that Rick has decided to stay. He expected Rick to have run away, but is pleased with the boy's decision, promising to show him what true fear means. Raster then gives a great demonstration of his magic, while Rick, nervous, still maintains his resolve and declares that he will face Raster no matter what. At this point, a man called Edo observes the E-rank exam and explains to us the 4 fundamental faculties that define an adventurer: physical strength, body control, magic reserves, and magic control. Edo has a special ability that allows him to visualize the levels of these faculties in other people. He demonstrates his ability by analyzing one of the participants and is surprised to see that the participant has A-rank levels. Although impressed, his eyes begin to feel the pressure, as looking at someone so powerful is dangerous for him. Edo then decides to check Rick's levels, but to his surprise, Rick's levels are so high that his eyes almost explode with pain, causing him to scream. Nearby, Alyssa and Rionette meet for the first time. When the other members of Rionette's team call out to her, Rionette invites Alyssa to join the group. Alyssa is shocked to see an orc sitting there, while Rionette kindly refuses Mizette's invitation to sit next to him, knowing that Mizette probably has suspicious intentions. Mizette, now interested in Alyssa, offers her the seat, but Rionette takes her to safety. Meanwhile, Rick finally enters the arena. Brodston asks Rionette how she thinks the former champion will do. Rionette confidently states that Rick will pass the exam, but Alyssa cautiously points out that it won't be easy, as Rick is about to face Raster, an A-rank adventurer. Raster is known for embarrassing champions, and Alyssa fears that Rick is in trouble. Alyssa is surprised when Rick's team members say it won't be a problem. Raster's brothers tease him as he comments that he's impressed that Rick escaped his guards. Raster declares that he is much stronger than his weak men, something Rick can tell just by looking at him. Rick, confused, wonders why Raster decided to become an adventurer. Raster then reveals that he is a nobleman and only became an adventurer to increase his social status. He admits that he's had enough of this life and is just waiting for the right moment to give up. Rick, upon hearing this, decides that he won't lose to someone who isn't a true adventurer. The fight begins, and Raster starts with a level 1 attack. He wonders if Rick is paralyzed with fear, since he doesn't move. However, Rick isn't scared. He just remembers Rionette's advice. Use the first minute of the fight to stay calm and observe your opponent. Rick does just that, while Raster impatiently attacks with a level 3 spell, without an incantation. The attack is incredibly powerful, but Rick holds his ground, analyzing his opponent as Rionette had recommended. Alyssa begins to worry about Rick, but Raster confidently says that such an attack will be nothing to him. Raster then begins to explain about the fundamental faculties, stating that a person's magical reserve needs to be developed before the age of 20, otherwise there is no hope of growth. He mocks Rick, who became an adventurer at the age of 30, saying that Rick's magic reserves must be extremely low. However, Brodston had a solution for this, as a memory from the past reveals. He told Rick that the only thing he could ever rely on was his own body. Brodston then suggested a little trip to the nearest town, but ended up taking Rick to a training camp with giant weights of 100 kilograms each. Rick, startled, was confused until Brodston hurried him along, explaining that they were about to enter a cave full of carnivorous monsters. To compensate for his low reserve of magic, Rick underwent exhaustive training in the other 3 faculties: physical strength, body control, and magical control. Raster, now angry, attacks Rick with a level 4 spell, but Rick once again stands his ground. Brodston reveals that he has essentially rebuilt Rick physically, strengthening his body to the extreme. Although Mazette hates dealing with uncomfortable things, he was responsible for teaching Rick how to control his magic. Mazette accepted this responsibility because she didn't want Rick to become a defenseless target during an attack. Rionette, in turn, taught Rick to control his body, surprising Alyssa, who didn't know that Rionette was much more than she seemed. Rick is now deeply connected to all the training he has received, reaching a power level close to S rank, just like the members of his group. When Raster attacks again, Rionette comments that Rick doesn't realize how powerful he really is. This is because, during his training, the members of the Orichalcan Fist always told Rick that any F rank should be able to perform such feats with ease, like bringing down a giant cave with a single punch. As Raster launches a series of attacks, Alyssa worries when one of the blows seems to hit Rick full on. Raster laughs, thinking he overreacted a little, but is soon surprised when Rick reappears, unharmed. This angers Raster, and his brothers are stunned by the strength of the old man. Raster decides to end the fight with a direct attack using his arm, but Rick repels him with ease. It's at this point that Rick finally understands what Rionette was saying. Raster is obsessed with the natural talents he was born with, but has never dedicated himself to refining or deepening them. He has huge reserves of magic, but is careless in everything he does. Against an opponent like Raster, Rick realizes that he can't lose. Raster, still arrogant, insists that Rick was just lucky. His brothers are shocked when Raster finally decides to use all his magic with a full incantation. He conjures up a huge fire attack, but everyone is stunned when Rick blocks it with just one hand. Rick comments that the attack was exaggerated. Mazette explains that Rick used such precise magic control that he managed to block the attack without spending even 0.01% of the energy that Raster used to create it. This demonstrates that even someone with limited magical reserves like Rick can achieve great feats with refined magical control. Raster, still insisting that Rick was lucky, goes for another attack. However, Rick is too fast for him, and Raster is forced to turn his body into iron to avoid being destroyed. Finally, Raster admits that Rick has skills beyond any level, but still claims that luck is on Rick's side. Rick, incredulous, points out that he wasn't even using magic, just body control. Intrigued, Raster asks how Rick managed to become so strong in just 2 years. The question insults Rick, who immediately remembers his brutal training. He had to run through explosions, swim in poisonous monster fluids until he was paralyzed, and could only leave a dragon cave after defeating them. Alyssa, shocked to hear about the training Rick endured, comments that an ordinary person would never survive that. Her surprise only increases when Raster, with a grim smile, reveals that Rick really didn't survive those challenges. Rick, on his training journey, lost his life several times. However, thanks to Raster's unique magic, which can bring someone back to life if used immediately after death, he was always revived. This frightening method of training, which involved the continual repetition of destroying and rebuilding the body, was essential in making him stronger. Mizette was also impressed by Rick's resilience, who never gave up, no matter how absurd the training became. In his recollections, Mizette recalls moments when he threw Rick down a mountain so that he could develop the ability to feel the wind. Of course, this resulted in Rick dying repeatedly, with Brodston reviving him each time. Elisarette, although she felt guilty about this kind of training, was also part of this journey, throwing Rick into dangerous situations under the mountains. Rionette's training was also brutal, teaching Rick to cut down falling trees on the move, which also led to Rick's death more than once. Raster, however, doesn't believe any of it. He thinks Rick is lying, as he refuses to accept that such terrible training could exist. Even if it did exist, he can't understand how anyone would be motivated enough to go through it. Rick's answer is simple. His dream keeps him motivated. He dreams of defeating the most powerful monster in the world, Kaiser El Cepieto. Raster and Fried laugh, calling Rick a fool, unable to believe he's serious. However, Elisarette knows that Kaiser El Cepieto is the ultimate monster mentioned in the legends of the Yamato hero, and Brodston reveals that Rick's goal is also the ultimate goal of the Orichalcon Fist group. Raster, still laughing, says that the legends of the Yamato hero are just children's stories, and that defeating El Cepieto is a silly dream, worthy of a child. Rick, unshaken, says that what Raster thinks makes no difference, as his dream has nothing to do with him. Agreeing to end the battle, Raster decides to use his full power. Surprisingly, he invokes a level 7 spell to restrict Rick, warning that this is nothing compared to what's coming next. Raster, determined to show what true talent is, begins a long incantation, promising to demonstrate the greatest magic a human being can achieve, level 8 Compound Magic. This is the greatest weapon in the arsenal of Raster, known as the Man of 1,000 Mirrors. His final move involves controlling a huge tree golem, which he summons from the ground. Raster commands Rick to retreat, believing that he will attempt some kind of aerial attack. However, Rick calmly replies that he will attack directly. Raster, scoffing, considers the idea delusional. Rick then asks Raster how many times he has practiced with the golem. Raster admits that he hasn't used it many times, only a few. Surprisingly, Rick reveals that he has practiced his air attack 100 million times. Raster's brothers think Rick is lying, while Alyssa wonders if such a number is physically possible in just 2 years. Brodston then explains that it is possible, but only with the use of space-time magic. Tired of the taunts, Raster announces that it's time to destroy Rick's dreams, just as he did with Link's. Raster launches his most powerful attack, but Rick unexpectedly breaks the restraints that were holding him back and, with one precise move, neutralizes Raster's attack with his level 1 aerial shot. Raster, confident that he will win, can hardly believe his eyes when his golem begins to disintegrate, shattering before his eyes. Rick's aerial shot hits with precision and completely destroys Raster's golem. Incredulous, Raster can't accept that something like this could happen to someone of his nobility. His golem is destroyed and he is thrown away, falling awkwardly to the ground. As he gets up, Rick looks at the fallen nobleman and declares that his dream remains intact and indestructible. Everyone around is surprised to see Rick as the victor, especially as he still appears to be an ordinary man. Rick's group quickly congratulates him on his victory, and Rick finally begins to realize how much stronger he really has become. Until this moment, he hadn't been fully aware of his own strength. Grateful, he expresses his gratitude to everyone who has helped him on his journey. Meanwhile, they overhear Raster's brothers discussing the need to take Raster for medical treatment, but the nobleman is determined to talk to Rick first. Rick can already see the doubt in Raster's eyes, who clearly doesn't understand how an elite nobleman like him could lose to a beginner like Rick. Fried tries to defend his brother, but is restrained. Rick, however, has only one simple answer for Raster. He explains that his success is due to the fact that he limits the number of techniques he uses and trains each one exhaustively. Rick then offers Raster some advice, suggesting that he do the same to improve his skills. However, Raster is still ashamed of his defeat. Despite everything, Raster promises that he will be Rick's examiner again in his next promotion, and swears that next time, he will be the one to emerge victorious. He walks away with his brothers, but surprisingly, Angelica shows Rick a little respect before leaving. The next day, the participants who passed the E-Rank exam await the results, which are announced over a loudspeaker. The numbers of those who passed are called out in order, and Rick waits patiently while his friends stand nearby. Rionette, surprised by Rick's calmness, asks him why he's so calm. Rick, smiling, simply replies that he was remembering something important. Rick finds himself reflecting on his past, remembering how he always wanted to become an adventurer, inspired by the legends of the hero Yamato. His greatest dream was to defeat the dreaded Kaiser Alate, but this path was not so simple. Rick's mother always believed that this journey would be too dangerous, while his father insisted that he should stop believing in fairy tales. One day, everything seemed to change. A doctor discovered that Rick possessed a rare genetic marker, an indicator that he might have a powerful innate ability, something extremely rare among people. Rick was amazed to learn that he could be as powerful as Yamato. However, the doctor explained that this ability wasn't something that would emerge through training alone. It would simply manifest on its own when the time was right. Still, Rick was filled with hope and decided that as soon as his ability was revealed, he would proudly declare to his parents that he was an adventurer. Days passed, and Rick's best friend began to ask if the ability had appeared yet. A year passed and still nothing, but Rick remained optimistic, believing that perhaps the ability would only manifest itself when he stopped being a child. However, as time went by, Rick began to lose heart. He heard stories of people with the same marker who never manifested their abilities. Even so, there were plenty of adventurers with no special skills, so his friend suggested that Rick go ahead and become an adventurer anyway. He even mentioned the money Rick could earn, but Rick didn't want to follow this path for the money. His desire to become an adventurer ran much deeper. One day, Rick's mother was thrilled to discover that he had been hired as a receptionist at a guild. His parents were finally proud of Rick, knowing that he had found a stable job. Accepting this new reality, Rick began working in his new role. But even so, he never stopped testing, in the hope that his innate ability would manifest itself. Years passed, his parents grew older, but Rick never abandoned the legends of Yamato. Although his daily routine as a receptionist continued, Rick kept his dream alive. One day, he commented to Alyssa that the monsters were being driven out of their dens and were beginning to roam the city, making things dangerous. New missions would be announced soon, and something big seemed to be on the way. As the low-level monsters spread across the city, Rick assumed that these new missions would be relatively simple. But then his friend Zaid arrived with great news. He had been promoted to rank B, a level that finally allowed him to live exclusively on adventures. Rick, with a forced smile, congratulated Zaid, but inside, the weight of the comparison hit hard. The truth was that Rick had held the same receptionist job for 14 years. During that time, he saw friends like Zaid rise through the ranks, while he remained in the same place. His life was stable, but he couldn't stop thinking about how far he would have come if he had chosen to be adventurous from the start. It was at that moment that screams cut through the air. A giant troll had appeared in the city. This was rare. A mid-level monster was never seen there. Even so, Rick ran to protect the young girl, proving that he didn't lack courage. But to his surprise, the girl simply asked him to get out of the way, and with one swift blow, destroyed the beast. Rick was shocked. This girl was incredibly powerful. She introduced herself as Rionette, and Rick automatically assumed that she must be a rank B adventurer. After all, no one defeats a troll like that without effort. But as the conversation progressed, it became clear that Rick was wrong. A lot. Rionette revealed that she was neither B rank nor A rank. She was S rank, the highest and most legendary level among adventurers. Rick was immediately flustered. An S rank? He had never met someone so powerful before, but he had to ask something, even if he was afraid of looking foolish. Rionette, noticing his hesitation, told him he needn't worry. She explained that since a near-death experience when he was 8, he no longer laughed. This gave Rick the confidence to tell her his dream. He had always wanted to defeat the legendary Kaiser Alipate, and, what's more, he revealed that he had an innate ability that had not yet manifested itself. Now, at the age of 30, Rick wondered, was there still time for him to become an adventurer? Rionette, in awe of Rick's courage, recognized his determination. But she was honest. At the age of 30, without ever having trained his magical reserves, Rick was facing a huge disadvantage. He knew it, but he was determined not to give up. Rionette explained to Rick that without having trained his magical reserves during his youth, it would be practically impossible to develop resistance now. Adventurers need at least some basis in magic, and she was confident that Rick had no real chance of becoming one. Rick maintained his positive attitude as always. He thanked Rionette for her honesty, admitting that it was the jolt of reality he needed. Perhaps it was time to leave behind the dream he had nurtured for so long. Deep down, Rick knew he should have given up years ago. Rionette apologized for her frankness, but Rick, trying to hide his disappointment, joked that this was what he needed to hear. In a light tone, he invited her for a meal. To his surprise, she accepted. The two arranged to meet the next day, which left Rick surprised and excited. The next morning, Alyssa noticed that Rick was in a great mood, and he excitedly suggested that they both work hard. When Zaid showed up, Rick happily gave him his assignment. The thought of going out to dinner with someone like Rionette made Rick think that maybe his life wasn't as bad as he thought. But then the unexpected happened. A monster suddenly appeared in town, destroying Rick's good mood. He was worried when he saw Rionette, but soon remembered that she could easily handle the situation. However, his concern grew when more monsters appeared. Rionette, without hesitation, assured him that she would take care of everything. Rick knew it would be a burden, so he stood back, watching as she destroyed the monsters with impressive skill. He was stunned to see how a simple pirouette of hers could tear the beasts apart. However, after defeating the last monster, Rionette felt something strange. She had a flashback of a terrible memory, and, under the influence of powerful magical energy, fainted. Before Rick could react, another monster appeared to attack them. That's when Zaid appeared out of nowhere, rescuing Rick and Rionette. More adventurers arrived, and Zaid explained that the guild had organized an emergency mission. They began to work together, using their skills to defeat the monsters. Rick, who thought he had already given up on becoming an adventurer, felt the old desire reawaken. He realized that he was still jealous of that world. Rionette warned him about the danger, but Rick, looking at Zaid, smiled and said that they would be fine. After all, Zaid was a B rank. Rionette was in pure panic and revealed something that left Rick even more shocked. A B rank wouldn't be enough to face the threat that was approaching. The reason? It was a dragon. Rionette explained that whenever she senses the magical presence of a dragon, she loses control of her own magic. Rick, however, was skeptical. He thought it was impossible for a dragon to appear there, but he was soon proved wrong. A gigantic dragon appeared before them, and even Zaid was incredulous. A dragon in a human city was unimaginable. They had learned at the Adventurers Guild that anyone below rank B should never try to fight a dragon. One of the group members, in a panic, tried to attack the dragon, but was quickly pushed back by the sheer force of the creature's wings. It was clear that they didn't stand a chance. Faced with the threat, the group decided that the only option was to flee. But, to everyone's dismay, the dragon conjured up a magical barrier, preventing any possibility of escape. They realized that the dragon had no intention of letting them escape. Zaid, resigned, believed that their lives were about to end. It was then that Rick unexpectedly stepped forward. Zaid reminded him that he was just a receptionist, that there was nothing he could do. Deep down, Rick also believed that his chances of survival were slim. However, he decided that if he was going to die there, at least he would die facing the dragon like a real adventurer. But as they came face to face with the immense creature, Rick realized that they wouldn't even be able to fight the monster. Terrified, Rick felt his fear growing, but there was something else. A fire was burning inside him, a feeling he thought he had lost. He realized that even in the midst of despair, this was how he wanted to live, as an adventurer. With courage, Rick threw a stone at the dragon. Although he didn't do any damage, his act inspired Zaid. Seeing Rick's courage, Zaid told the other adventurers that they couldn't let a receptionist be the only one to act. With their morale renewed, the adventurers, now inspired, attacked the dragon fiercely. However, the mighty beast used its breath of fire on them. Zaid, with an incredible effort, turned everyone into iron temporarily to protect them from the impact. Even so, the explosion was so strong that everyone was injured. Zaid, now exhausted, believed that this really was the end for them. Meanwhile, Rionette blamed herself for not being able to fight the dragon, but for her, it seemed too late. As the dragon prepared to deliver the final blow, everyone was ready to accept their fate. But amidst the rubble, Rick surprisingly emerged. He was serious, with a determined expression, and swore that he would fulfill his dream, no matter what challenges he faced. Rionette, horrified, could only watch as the dragon advanced to crush him. At that moment, however, a voice echoed. Rick had acquired an ability. Everyone was stunned when Rick not only lifted the dragon's foot, but did so with ease. No one could believe their eyes. Rick looked like a completely different person, with so much magic overflowing from his body that it was visible to the naked eye. Rick, surprised, realized that his innate ability had finally manifested itself, and wondered why it had taken so long. Now, full of confidence, Rick challenged the dragon to give everything he had so that he could test his new ability. The dragon launched a series of devastating attacks, but Rick blocked them all with ease. Eventually, Rick counterattacked with such force that he tore a hole in the dragon's magical barrier, as well as seriously injuring the creature. Everyone, including Rick, was shocked by what had just happened. Rick, humbled, commented that it wasn't so bad, before fainting. Sometime later, Rick woke up with intense pain in his body. Rionette informed him that all the magical circuits in his body had been destroyed and that he had been unconscious for a whole week. He was even more surprised to learn that Rionette had been by his side the whole time. Not understanding why, Rick asked her why. Rionette then revealed that she had been waiting to invite him to join the group to which she belonged, the legendary Orichalcan Fist. Rick was incredulous. He couldn't believe that such an incredible proposal was being made. Rionette explained that they shared a common goal, to defeat Kaiser Alipate, the legendary monster. The revelation left Rick even more shocked, as it confirmed that Kaiser really existed. He had so far fought only with courage, but Rionette was confident that Rick could become much stronger and fight alongside them. For the first time, someone told Rick that he could really become an adventurer, and Rionette was the person who guaranteed it. Rick, overwhelmed by a sense of relief, wondered if it was really alright to follow this path. Rionette assured him that it was, and Rick couldn't hold back the tears. Back in the present, Rick's number was announced. Rionette congratulated him on finally becoming a qualified adventurer. Rick, overcome with emotion, thanked his mentors for everything they had taught him and his old self for never giving up on his dream. Lix congratulates Rick on passing the exam and excitedly reminds him of the drink they had agreed to have together to celebrate. Rick thinks it's a great idea, but is surprised when Lix expresses an interest in meeting his team. Rick's face immediately reveals his hesitation, but he ends up agreeing to introduce him to the group a little later. A few hours later, Lix heads for the agreed location, but begins to find it strange that Rick has suggested he bring his most powerful armor. When he arrives at the address, Lix doesn't believe he's in the right place, as it resembles a demonic castle. Confused, he rings the doorbell. Rick comes to greet him, and Lix notices that, curiously, there were no monsters on the way there. Rick explains that monsters don't come near the place, which makes Lix wonder why he needs armor if there are no monsters. Rick ironically replies that the armor isn't for the monsters, but to keep Lix away from a coffin in unexpected situations. This baffles Lix. When he is introduced to the girls in the group, Lix, who is a father, thinks of his daughter and hopes that one day she will be as happy as Alyssur Retta seems to be. But he is completely shocked when Alyssur Retta conjures a level 6 spell with a single word: boom. The magical attack almost destroys him, but Rick luckily manages to save him in time. Annoyed, Rick scolds Alyssur for using magic inside the castle, explaining that he will have to deduct the cost of the repairs from Elsar's food budget. Alyssur, repentant, begs for forgiveness, and Rick decides to spend some time with her so that she can calm down. Meanwhile, Lix is left to relax for a while and takes the opportunity to observe his surroundings. He is impressed by the size and structure of the place. While exploring the castle, Lix finds Mizette outside, working on a new weapon. Mizette explains that building crazy weapons is her hobby and asks Lix to test her latest invention. She suggests that he channel magic into the gun and pull the trigger. However, the recoil is so strong that Lix is thrown backwards, while the shot causes extensive damage all around. Mizette, seeing the exaggeration, comments that she will need to adjust the gun to improve stability. Still stunned by what he is witnessing, Lix begins to realize how chaotic this place can be. Then, he comes across Brodston, surrounded by a pile of books. Brodston, an incredibly intellectual orc, comments that he has read most of the books in the library, but admits that lately he hasn't had much time to immerse himself in reading as much as he would like. Brodston offers to give Lix a training lesson, and he enthusiastically accepts. Brodston is pleased to see the sparkle in Lix's eyes, the same sparkle he saw in Rick some time ago when he started training him. Later, Rick is shocked to discover that Lix has gone with Brodston into the forest. Terror grips Rick, as he knows how dangerous Brodston's training can be. Meanwhile, in the forest, Lix screams in fear, believing that his life is about to end. He is thrown off a steep slope, mentally saying goodbye to his wife and children. Luckily, he lands safely on the food that Rionette had collected for dinner. Rionette notices the weights attached to Lix and soon deduces that this was Brodston's doing. Lix, still frightened, explains that Brodston made him run up a hill so steep it was practically a cliff. Rionette, with a smile, comments that Brodston was the one who most often took Rick's life during training. Lix, absolutely terrified by this revelation, pretends not to have heard. Brodston arrives to continue his training, and Lix, relieved that he's still alive, comments to Rick that Brodston's training should be something simple. Rick quickly warns him that he shouldn't believe any of them when they say the training will be easy. Brodston, laughing, adds that he can bring people back to life if the training eliminates them. Mizette, fed up with all this talk of intense training, just wants to get back to tinkering with her inventions. While everyone is waiting for dinner, Lix, curious, asks Rick if he has ever gotten closer to Rionette. Rick, surprised by the question, explains that there is a 20-year age difference between them. Lix, however, encourages him, explaining that what really matters is how they feel about each other. That evening, everyone enjoys a wonderful feast made by Rionette, praising her culinary skills. Lix seizes the moment and tells Rick that this would be the perfect opportunity to help her, suggesting that he use the moment to get closer to her. Rick rushes to help Rionette, while Lix takes the opportunity to ask more about Rick's innate ability. Rick explains that although he has this ability, he can't activate it on his own. Even so, thanks to intense training, Rick has already reached S rank, even without relying on his skill or weapons. And if this ability were fully activated, he would surpass even the other members of Orichalcon Fist. Lix, who works at Central, is intrigued and curious about the 6 jewels, magical stones mentioned in the legends of Yamato. Rick explains that his goal is to defeat the legendary Kaiser Alate, and that these stones are the key to opening the door to the place where Kaiser Aspius sleeps, awaiting the day of his rebirth. The 6 jewels are activated every 200 years, and at this moment they must be emitting an immense amount of magic. Lix, who has always had doubts about the stories, now begins to believe them more when she hears Rick and the others talk about them with such certainty. Even without much information at the moment, Lix vows to investigate the magic stones further. Rick then asks if Lix has any more good advice. He tries to help Rionette, as Lix suggested, but soon realizes that she is so skilled that she doesn't need much help. The next day, a new adventurer wonders why she has to clean up the guild when she could be defeating monsters with her skills. She tries to accept a more dangerous mission, but her request is denied. Brodston, confused, doesn't understand why, since the danger level of the mission was only 82, something the group could easily handle. The young adventurer finds Rick's group quite strange, and wonders why the guildmaster treats these adventurers in such a special way. Rick, using his receptionist skills, reviews the mission requirements and realizes that they can do it, as long as they have 4 people in the group. Brodston then asks if the guild could help them find a 4th person. The guildmaster suggests a new recruit, Rai, who was eager to accept a more dangerous mission, but was hesitant to join the group, which she found strange: a talking orc, a girl, and an older man. Even so, the guildmaster assures her that they are great adventurers. Rai, eager to finally accept a mission, decides to lend her strength to Rick's group. They make it clear that they are looking for a magic stone, and Lix explains that the stone must be in that area. Rai asks if it's worth a lot of money, and Rick replies that although the stone is valuable, it's also dangerous to handle without proper care, as well as attracting monsters nearby. Rai confidently assures him that he can deal with any threat that comes his way. Rai is a rank F adventurer at the moment, but is confident that she will soon rise to rank A. She observes Rick, realizing that he also started late, and this makes her feel less alone on her journey. Meanwhile, she thinks of Rionette, who had returned home and hoping that the rest of the group was okay. Mizette reassures Rai, reminding him that Brodston is with them, so there's nothing to worry about. However, Mizette, being the quirky inventor that he is, tries to use one of his gadgets to spy on Rionette. She quickly destroys the device, leaving Mizette frustrated. Brodston, with his usual calm, announces that they are approaching the cave where they must find what they are looking for. Rai, on spotting a wyvern, panics, shocked to discover that they were looking for a wyvern lair. But Brodston isn't worried at all. He orders the monster out of the way and tells Rai that the plan is simple: take down all the monsters that appear. Rai tries to warn him that attacking the wyverns will only attract more of them, but Brodston reveals that this is exactly his goal. He asks Rai to go to a safe area, away from danger, to avoid turning to ash, leaving her horrified. Rick, seeing Rai's fear, takes her to an open field and reminds her that if she wants to be strong, she has to face the challenges. Soon after, a wyvern is thrown near them, and Rick watches as Alyssa and Brodston quickly deal with the group of wyverns. Rai is impressed by the distance they manage to throw the creatures. However, the terror grows when a red giant appears. Rick agrees that running away would be the safest option, but there's something he needs to check. Determined, he refuses to back down, even with the odds stacked against them. Seeing Rick's determination, Rai decides to support him. She begins to prepare a spell to protect him, but is completely stunned when she sees Rick destroy the beast completely with a single attack. The next day, Rai, exhausted, is warned by the guildmaster that something simple never happens when the Orichalcon Fist group is involved. Remembering the day before, Rai is still surprised that Rionette was going to cook the wyvern for dinner. For her, the idea of eating a wyvern was unbelievable. The guildmaster laughs and explains that the members of the Orichalcon Fist are considered the strongest on the continent, and he hopes that the experience with them has not only made Rai more cautious on dangerous missions, but also motivated her to train harder. In the end, the group gets hold of one of the 6 jewels, called the Crimson Flower, which has an incredible amount of magic. Alisar wants to activate it, but the group decides that this would be dangerous, as she could end up blowing up the jewel, as she usually does with other things. When you carefully activate the jewel, a map appears of a large city called Haraya, famous for its Colosseum and the battles that take place there. In a brief glimpse, we see a battle taking place in this Colosseum, with a young woman being announced as the winner. 400 years ago, King Alexander built the famous Colosseum of Haraya and organized fighting tournaments where he himself competed using only his body, winning 10,000 bouts. People from all over the world came to challenge him, and thanks to the success of these competitions, the small kingdom prospered, becoming the mighty kingdom of Haraya. Today, a large statue of Alexander, known as the King of Fists, dominates the Colosseum, and being a professional fighter is one of the most valued occupations in the kingdom. Brodston regrets never having had the chance to fight the legendary king, while Rick and his group try to get information about the 6 magic jewels. However, people are terrified by Brodston's presence, except for a young boxer called Gold, who is undeterred. He challenges Brodston to a fight, but the giant orc just laughs and says that Gold doesn't look that strong. Gold and his friend Militia join the group when Rick shows them the Crimson Blossom, one of the 6 jewels, and asks if they know where the next one is. Gold and Militia say they've seen something similar before, but can't remember exactly where. The group is interrupted by a parade announcing the King of Fists tournament, one of the biggest fighting events in the kingdom, with over 5.5 million participants. The reigning champion Kerwin, who has won the last 3 tournaments in a row, makes his triumphant entrance. The jewel the group is looking for is attached to Kerwin's champion's belt, which leaves everyone in shock. They realize that in order to get the jewel, they will have to win the tournament. Kerwin thanks the crowd and talks to his coach, explaining that his role as a boxer is to keep the excitement alive in the tournament. The trainer notes that Kerwin is in excellent shape, but the champion says he won't be satisfied until he finds an opponent to match him. When Rick's group approaches, Brodston wastes no time and orders Kerwin to hand over the champion's belt. Rick, visibly uncomfortable, quickly intervenes, explaining that they are not thieves and that they are only interested in the jewel attached to the belt, suggesting a fair exchange for another equivalent jewel. The trainer, impatient, plans to expel them, but Kerwin stops them, saying that he trusts his instinct and realizes that they are not lying. However, he makes it clear that the only way they can get the jewel is by winning the King of Fists tournament. Brodston, to everyone's surprise, agrees to the proposal and the group leaves. The trainer wonders why Kerwin allowed them to leave so easily, but the champion explains that they are stronger than they appear. He realizes that although Rick looks like an ordinary person, his body has been trained to extraordinary levels. As for Brodston, Kerwin is excited, sensing that he could be the real challenge he's been looking for. Now, with their plan in place, the group decides to enter the tournament, but first they have to go through the preliminaries, which take place in the East and West Leagues of the kingdom. Brodston chooses to take part in the Eastern League, while Rick will be responsible for the Western one. Rick, still worried, asks if Brodston will be alright on his own, but the giant orc reveals that he already has a guide, and to everyone's surprise, that guide is Gold. Before any fight, Rick has to pass the official test to become a boxer. Ryanette explains that many people from all over the world come for this test in the hope of achieving glory. Rick, always optimistic and confident, says it sounds like fun, and prepares for the next stage of the journey. Rick's first test is a simulated physical combat with randomly selected opponents. His opponent is a promising newcomer who has won all his fights in the preliminaries. Even though victory is not mandatory to pass, as long as a certain standard is met, Rick is focused. In the meantime, Angelica makes a dramatic entrance into the arena, but is horrified to see that her opponent is Rick. The small but excited crowd believes that Angelica will defeat Rick quickly, and she feels the pressure, especially since her opponent is the man who defeated her brother, Raster, an A-ranked adventurer. Although she doesn't want to be humiliated again, she is determined to fight seriously. Rick fears that Raster might be present, but Angelica explains that she has come alone. Although Rick doesn't seem that impressive, Angelica decides not to underestimate him this time. When the test begins, she promises to give it her all. She announces her most powerful attack and lunges forward, but to her surprise, she falls to the ground before she can land the blow. Confused, she tries to get up but falls again. Rick approaches and, smiling, asks her what she thinks of the new skill he has learned. Angelica, perplexed, hardly understands what has happened. Rick reveals that his technique is called the 8 Secrets, and the first secret is to sweep his opponent's legs repeatedly in order to destabilize him emotionally and physically. Angelica is shocked to realize that Rick swept her legs so fast that she, a second-rate rider, couldn't keep up. Incredulous, Angelica refuses to believe that such an ability exists, but with Rick, anything seems possible. He explains that this is just the first of many techniques he has developed, leaving her speechless as she tries to regain her composure in the face of his impressive display of power. Angelica creates some distance between them, but Rick knocks her down again. He continues to do so, but Angelica insists that this won't be enough to make her give up. Rick then decides to fight for real, and Angelica's bluff is exposed, making her surrender. Rick is now a boxer and goes on to the preliminaries. However, before he leaves, Angelica interrupts him, asking how many times he intends to humiliate her. Rick, not wanting her to cry, offers to take her out to eat. Melicia's parents own the restaurant, and Angelica is shocked to hear that Rick intends to win the King of Fists tournament this year. To her, it seems like a crazy dream. Angelica, who became a boxer only 4 months ago, also plans to enter the tournament, but thought Rick would try next year. She admits that Rick's power defies logic, but thinks it's impossible for him to win. She explains that the road to the tournament is long. Only those who win 40 fights during 6 months of preliminaries earn the right to take part. Rick thought it was enough to win a lot of fights, but the fights are brutal. People fight a maximum of 10 fights a month, and with only 1 week left, winning 40 fights seems impossible. Rick is shocked to hear this, as he thought he could do 10 fights a day and thus complete 40 in 4 days. Angelica is horrified by this idea. The next day, Rick faces his first preliminary fight. His opponent is Albert, surrounded by rumors of using illegal weapons. Although no evidence was found during the inspection, Rick is advised to be careful. When the fight begins, Rick is relieved to see that Albert is apparently not armed. However, Albert has a hidden stone that multiplies the strength of his attacks by 30 times. The fight begins, and Albert uses his coat to block Rick's vision. His attack is powerful, and he declares victory. However, he soon feels the pain of his broken arm. Rick sees the impact stone and comments that it can break the bones of anyone who isn't sufficiently trained. Albert notices, but it's too late. Now it's Rick's turn to attack. Rick uses the second of his 8 secrets, a technique that causes a shockwave with 1 punch, stunning his opponent's brain without causing serious injury. The aim of the 8 secrets is to win without seriously injuring the opponent, something that surprises everyone present. Rick is declared the winner. A spectator, impressed, predicts that this tournament will be historic. Later, Angelica takes part in her own fight, easily destroying her opponent. Rick congratulates her on making it through the preliminaries, and Angelica is proud to have won 40 fights in a row. Even so, she doesn't believe that Rick will try to do the same in just 4 days. She points out that each arena only allows 1 fight a day, which means Rick will have to travel long distances between arenas. Rick needs to get to the Green Hill Arena in 10 minutes for the next fight, but Angelica, annoyed, tries to warn him that the arena is 30 kilometers away and that he won't make it in time. Rick finds the idea of using a slow carriage absurd, as he prefers to run. Angelica doesn't understand, but Rick demonstrates that he's much faster than any chariot. She would like to watch Rick's next fight but can't get there in time. She does, however, parkour to the side of the fight. But when she arrives, Rick has already won the fight. She still thinks Rick needs to improve his 8 secrets of calm. Rick heads to the next venue, and Angelica tries not to be dragged by Rionette, who takes her along. They pass through several arenas as Rick beats his opponents. After 4 days, Angelica is stunned to see that Rick has managed to complete the 40 bouts required for the preliminaries. Now, they move on to the league block matches. Angelica, relieved, realizes that she is not in the same block as Rick. She wanted to win the tournament, but now understands that it will be almost impossible with Rick around. Rionette mentions that Boston, the S-ranked adventurer, will also be taking part. Angelica, worried, doesn't want a certain man to get away with something. When questioned by Rionette, Angelica changes the subject and asks where Rick is. Rionette explains that he is running his 600 kilometers a day. Angelica is no longer surprised by Rick's crazy antics and wonders how Rionette can put up with him. She punches him, frustrated that people think they're in love. Suddenly, a man approaches and Angelica thinks he's trying to flirt, which embarrasses her. In fact, he just needs their help on a job, as his team is incomplete. Rick finishes his run and discovers that the man's name is Snape, who is impressed by Rick's speed in qualifying for the Western League. Rick is impressed to have been the fastest to qualify in the history of the Preliminary League and is surprised to realize that Snape knows him. During the conversation, Rick discovers that Snape is a retired boxer, having won his last fight 20 years ago when he was only 23. That victory was the first and last competition he ever won. Although he no longer fights, Snape's company has entered a competitor in this year's tournament. Snape asks Rick to greet Angelica for him and warns her not to get too excited. Militia, concerned, reveals that Snape is part of the Dragonauts, a company rumored to be involved in the underworld. What's more, Snape is the main sponsor of the tournament, guaranteeing a place for his fighter. Angelica and Rionette agree to help someone who has asked for help. The Rabbits, responsible for animating the tournament and taking bets, praise a new participant known as the Dark Elf. During the confusion, a drunk man upsets Angelica, but ends up paying the price for his recklessness. Rick arrives and, while he praises Rionette, Angelica is furious that he didn't react in the same way to her. Meanwhile, the former gym boss reads about how Brosen, in an impressive feat, got through the preliminaries in just 2 days, with each of his fights being decided by a single knockout blow. Even more remarkably, Rick also got through the Western League in 4 days. Despite this, Erwin doesn't seem daunted, just excited for this year's tournament. The owner of the gym met Erwin and was amazed to see him finish off a group of boys. He called Erwin by his nickname, the Ravenous Wolf of the Slums. Erwin asked the old man to clean up the mess he had caused, but the man refused, explaining that he was there to take Erwin back to Haraya, where he could conquer everything he wanted through fighting. Although the idea of riches didn't interest him, the promise of facing strong fighters convinced him to accept. Erwin now carries the same expression of excitement on his face, something he hasn't felt for some time. Meanwhile, Angelica is still annoyed that Rick doesn't notice her in a special way. Rick changes the subject and reveals that Snape has been looking for her, leaving Angelica surprised, but she denies knowing anyone by that name. The next day sees the start of the League of Blocks competition, which will determine the participants for the final tournament. The entry for each block is highly competitive, making the fights intense. Rick faces a girl called Helen and realizes that Angelica doesn't look her best, but she manages to win her fight. In turn, Rick uses one of his 8 secrets to defeat his opponent, which leaves Rionette satisfied with the control he is developing. Angelica, however, finds Rick too impressive. They take turns winning fights until only 4 fights remain. Rick wants to discuss strategies to ensure they win them all, but Angelica says she doesn't need to, surprising Rick with her combination of physical techniques and magic. Rick is worried about Angelica, wondering if she has suffered serious damage. It is soon announced that Angelica has been defeated. She fought hard, pressuring her opponent, but Taylor destroyed her with a single blow. Although physically healed, her pride is still wounded. Rick criticizes her for being impatient and stubborn, but this makes her even angrier. He insists that if she had concentrated more, she could have won. His words make Angelica give in and confess that Snape is her fiancé. She explains that a year ago, her parents died in an accident. Since then, she and her siblings have taken on the responsibilities of the household, facing great financial difficulties. Her grandfather made a deal with Snape, who promised to help the family financially, as long as he could marry Angelica. Rick reacts with great delay to the revelation, which makes her furious at his apparent lack of perception. Angelica continues, explaining that when she tried to stop the wedding, she discovered that Snape had become the tournament's main sponsor. Before they could discuss further, a mix-up occurred. A dragon man, of whom Angelica is extremely afraid, starts causing trouble and is confronted by Taylor, the same one who defeated Angelica. Taylor tries to protect the woman, but the dragon easily knocks him down with a single blow. When a waitress tries to calm the situation down, the dragon bothers her too. At that moment, the dragon attacks Angelica, but Rick intervenes, surprising everyone by ordering it to calm down. Soon afterwards, Snape appears and orders his dragon, Geith, to save his strength for the tournament. Snape apologizes to the barkeeper, explaining that Geith is his brother, and that there is no one strong enough to defeat him. He checks that Angelica is alright, and is relieved to hear that she hasn't been hurt. After Snape leaves, Angelica reveals to Rick the connection between Snape and the tournament. Snape promised Angelica's family a large sum of money, but after investigating, Angelica discovered that his company doesn't have enough funds to fulfill the promise. She realizes that Snape is planning to make money from the tournament. Rick soon deduces that Snape is using his position as a sponsor to manipulate the results of the tournament, and Angelica confirms it. Determined to break off the engagement, Angelica decides to win the tournament to stop Snape from keeping his end of the bargain. The problem is that Snape has staked everything on Geith, and Angelica knows she's not strong enough to beat him. Surprisingly, Rick offers to train Angelica. Stunned, she begins to dread the rigorous training that awaits her. Rick warns her that the training will be more challenging than Angelica can imagine, but she asks him not to hold her back. Surprisingly, when Rick puts weights on her, he only instructs her to remember her strengthened magic, which prevents her from succumbing. However, Angelica wants him to explain the training before proceeding, but Rick ignores her and starts dragging her at high speed. Angelica panics, not understanding what is happening. Rick explains that the aim is to get her body used to moving quickly, even when being pulled by someone faster. Although Angelica has good acceleration, her problem is the instability that occurs soon afterwards. She begs him to stop for a moment, but Rick says that the key to rapid improvement is to push her beyond her limits. He assures her that it won't be so difficult, as there are only 6 hours left. After this period, Angelica is surprised to realize that her legs are still firm, as she thought they would have given way. Rick shares that he went through the same training and even died 3 times on his first day. Proud to have survived, Angelica is shocked when Rick reveals that there will be a training session in the afternoon, just after a short lunch break. She asks him to finish, but Rick seems to ignore her plea, stating that they will meet again in an hour. After 5 days of intense training, Angelica tries to convince herself that she hasn't run away, but has made a tactical withdrawal to preserve her mental health. She believes Rick won't find her, but she's wrong. He's looking for her everywhere, even though she only escaped for 15 minutes. Rick, surprisingly, understands his escape, as he himself did the same during the 2 years of his training, escaping dozens of times, and dying countless others. On one occasion, Alicera had to share her sister with Boston so that he could revive Rick more than 2,000 times, resulting in endless training and deaths. As a result, Rick had to adapt. He was on the verge of giving up several times, but Broson always gave him words of encouragement, comparing the regret of giving up with the suffering he was facing, and always weighing the decision to continue more heavily. Angelica, for her part, reflects on everything she hates about life as a noblewoman, where her contributions to the family as a fighter have taken her away from being an ordinary lady. That's why she dreams of becoming the first special class woman to be a knight. She also doesn't want to carry the weight of regret and is preparing to train again. Although Angelica is skilled with a sword, the tournament doesn't allow weapons. Rick then suggests that he teach her techniques to turn her hands into swords. He summons Rionette to join the training. When the time comes for the last fight between the BLSE leaders, Angelica, with a fierce look on her face, shows a change in her determination. The audience notices that her elegant fighting style won't work against her current opponent, but the fight begins and they are surprised to see her attack with ferocity, winning an instant victory. Rick is pleased with the result of the training, although Angelica seems to go into a trance. Later, Mate returns with new information about one of the orbs, but the search has yielded no results. Mizette tries to refresh herself with a waitress, but ends up being rejected. Braun explains to Mizette that they will receive another orb if they win the tournament. Alucard also wants to join the tournament, but Rick fears that she could cause havoc if she enters the competition. He tries to convey that he is training Angelica, but she feels disappointed that she doesn't have enough time to train more. The others encourage her, pointing out that even a little training can make a big difference. Alice, not understanding the conversation, nevertheless encourages everyone to do their best. Angelica is ready for the competition, because the next day, the first King's Tournament begins. The first battles are announced, and among the fighters are Rick, Angelica, and Geese. Rick is relieved not to have to face Brosen, because he knows that if he did, he would probably give up. Brosen's opponent is a strange-looking, fish-like man, while his bald friend encourages him. Kelvin, on the other hand, seems to be in a worrying situation, but Cyclops remains confident, believing that Kelvin will emerge victorious, regardless of his condition. As the crowd begins to place their bets on the winners, Angelica notices that Geist has been placed in a bracket that prevents him from facing Brosen or Kelvin until the final of the tournament. She realizes that the manipulation of the results has already begun, as Geist will be able to avoid difficult opponents. Angelica understands that they intend to make Geist look like an invincible fighter, and when the stakes against him rise, Snape will ensure that his opponents throw the fight and lose, allowing him to make a fortune. Determined to dismantle this plan, Angelica prepares for the second round. Later, Coven expresses their happiness at seeing Brosen and Rick competing. Brosen reminds them that everyone is there for the belt, and anticipation is running high. Cyclops notes that Kelvin is looking like a real challenger, bringing up memories of when he brought Kelvin to his gym and bragged about having a fighter from his school in the top 4 of the tournament. Kelvin, now allowed to face this opponent, asks if he will also be allowed to end his life, which is obviously against the rules, as is the use of weapons. He assures his rival not to worry about defeat. However, even after numerous victories, Kelvin had never been properly trained. After his first defeat, he began to train intensely, always seeking to outdo himself in order to face stronger opponents, which became the lifestyle he had always wanted. With his relentless training, Kelvin impressed everyone by annihilating the champion in his first tournament. 6 years have passed, and Cyclops is excited to see Kelvin's spirit burning brightly again. Soon, the first match of the tournament gets underway, but Geese's opponent is no match for him. Even though his rival demands that Geese take the fight seriously, Geese, with his immense strength, quickly knocks him out, leaving the audience in shock. Rick suspects there's something strange, because even with all of Geese's power, his moves look amateurish. However, Geese wins easily, impressing the crowd. The tournament progresses and our heroes win all their fights. The last match of the first round involves Kelvin, and everyone is eager to witness his performance. He attacks with incredible speed, and Rick notes that he seems to know exactly what his opponent plans to do. Brosen explains how extraordinary Kelvin really is, able to sense changes, electrical signals, and adrenaline by smell alone. Everyone agrees that he's an incredible fighter, but the crowd pays attention when Kelvin is knocked down. Rick is the only one surprised to hear that Kelvin allowed it to happen. Applauded, Kelvin quickly gets up and knocks out his opponent, being announced as the winner. However, his friends believe that he is playing too much with the fight. The next day, the second round begins, and Snape sits down next to Rick, introducing himself to the others. Alicent wonders why the lizard is trying to be friendly. Rick wonders why he's not in the VIP area. Then Snape explains that the next fight is extremely significant, as it's a fight between his brother and his fiancée, and he needs to watch closely. Geese reflects on how much he drank the night before as he meets with Angelica. He needs to remind her of who she is, and explains that Snape asked him not to hurt her face so that she can be well at her wedding. Angelica longs to show him the fruits of her efforts, but he scoffs, saying that no amount of training can make up the difference in her power. Angelica believes that he has also trained hard because of his physique, but Gonsos replies that he doesn't train. He just leads an ordinary life that has resulted in his body. He considers himself a natural and suggests that Angelique stand still during the fight, so he wouldn't have to worry about not landing a punch in her stomach, allowing her to still have children with Snape. This infuriates her, and she vows to defeat him. The fight begins and the crowd cheers, but Angelica is perplexed to realize that her first attack doesn't affect Geese. She dodges an attack, but again, her direct hit has no effect. Angelica realizes that her basic attacks won't be enough to hurt Geese, so she decides to surprise Snape in the stands by using empowered magic. Geese questions her plan, while Rionette cheers her on. Angelica uses her new thread slicer technique, managing to cut Geese. Everyone cheers for her, and Angelique wonders who Geese was calling his baby, leaving Snape stunned. Even the sharpest sword could scratch Geth's skin, and Rick and Rionette are aware of this, because that's what they taught Angelica. A flashback reveals Rionette demonstrating a technique called the wire bar. And Angelica initially thought Rick was a psychopath for wanting her to learn it. He explained that it wasn't impossible, since he had managed to learn it. Rick never achieved the precision of Rionette, who then suggested that Angelica feel the wind as she moved her arm. Angelica struggled to understand, but dedicated herself and eventually learned to adapt her other skills to the technique, which releases a short, powerful burst of magical energy stored in her body. Although it has a significant impact, the intense training made it seem insignificant to her. Angelica's Flicker Feet ability allows her to use this technique in a unique way, but annoyed, when she tries it again, she almost gets cut in half. Snape enjoys the battle, but Geth, tired of holding on, throws Angelica against a wall and tells Snape that he can't resist such a motivated opponent. Angelica refuses to give up, but Geth has seen her skill many times and now matches her speed. He hits her hard, mocking her for being mediocre. Rick worries about Angelica, but Snape is happy to finally realize Geth's strength. Snape met his adopted brother when Geth was 8 years old, and he beat him so many times that Snape could hardly stand it. Geth is a perfect prodigy, endowed with every talent for combat, and a real monster who continues to insult Angelica, calling her useless. He belittles her, saying she'll never change, and even insults her parents. Snape knows that Angelica thinks he's trying to manipulate her into losing, but Geth doesn't need that, as he's extremely strong. Instead, Snape did the opposite. The chances of a sponsored competitor winning were low, so everyone bet against Geth, and Snape bet big on his victory. Everyone watches in horror as Geth viciously attacks Angelica. Rick realizes that Angelica has reached her limit. Although she believes that Geth can't beat her, he is determined to break her, wanting to show that someone mediocre will never beat a prodigy. Angelica refuses to relent and tries one last punch, but this only incites Geth to eliminate her. Rick tries to stop the fight, but it's too late as Geth launches his final attack. Luckily for Angelica, something makes her escape, but Geth is announced as the winner. He realizes that it was Rick who threw his shoe, and Rick, furious, meets up with Geth. The latter is annoyed by the interference, but is surprised to see Rick dodge his attack. Rick explains that he's in no hurry because he wants to defeat Geth in front of the crowd. Geth is furious, but Rick wins his next fight. Angelica, still in bad shape, occupies his thoughts. Rick reflects on her hard training and sympathizes with her plight, while Brosen defeats his opponent with a single blow, just like Rick. Kelvin demonstrates his immense power with only 4 competitors left, and the semifinals will take place the following day. Rick finishes some training and finds Angelica recovering. He assumes that Brune has helped her, but warns her that any deep injuries will remain. Something bothers her, but Rick doesn't notice, and she reveals that he trained her, even though there wasn't much in it for him. She ended up failing. She apologizes for wasting his time and says that she just wanted to prove that she could support herself. Angelica tries to convince herself that marrying Snape won't be so bad, but Rick interrupts her, saying that he should be the one to apologize, since he didn't discern Geth's true strength before it was too late. Rick only instructs her to watch their next fight closely so that she can see what lies beyond the training she has undergone. Finally, the semifinals begin, and Rick prepares to face Geth. He is surprised to hear that Geth wants to apologize to Angelica, but in fact, he only regrets not ending her life, forcing her to live tormented by her lack of skill. The fight begins, and Geth starts insulting Rick, but Rick knocks him down, leaving the prodigy on his knees. He tells Geth to stop acting so pathetic, but Geth stands up confidently again. Angelica is shocked to see Rick's attacks working against Geth's iron body. Rick uses only controlled attacks, and the impact is not limited to the surface, but penetrates his body. No matter how strong Geth is, if Rick gets the timing right, it will cause significant damage. He gives Geth the chance to give up, but Geth uses strengthening magic, specifically for dragons, which intensifies the fight and consumes a lot of magical energy. This, however, is not a problem for Geth. Snape explains that he never trained his magical ability, he was just born with a lot of it, while Rick is practically the opposite. Geth then tells Rick to blame his parents. Rick's next attack is interrupted by Geth's body, and Angelica is surprised to see that the lizard managed to learn the technique she was using. The crowd falls silent, while Geth assumes that everyone is tired of seeing a prodigy beat up an ordinary person. However, Brune sees it differently, explaining that Rick doesn't care about the audience, only the impression he makes on Angelica. Rick blocks another attack and is pleased to see that Geth is finally showing signs of fatigue. Geth is shocked to notice that no matter how hard he attacks, Rick never spills a drop of blood. This is because Rick uses a special technique that allows him to disperse the attacks inside his body, hardly taking any damage. Geth feels insulted as Rick is clearly holding back. Rick explains that he has restricted his physical abilities to match Angelica's level because winning is not his only goal. He also wants to show Angelica his true potential. This fight becomes a kind of virtual rematch between Geth and Angelica, which infuriates Geth, but Rick asks him to calm down and think about his next attack. Geth prepares his attack, which smashes Rick's armor to pieces. Rick notes that Geth has never tried hard enough at anything, so feeling tired is new to him. Snape reluctantly admits that Rick can overcome Geth's power, but Rick's team points out that Rick has few skills. Rick started training after the time limit on his magical reserves, so technically he's below average. Snape can't understand how he can surpass a prodigy like Geth, but Angelica notices that Rick tells Geth that he's not used to feeling tired, so he can no longer maintain his precision in his attacks. Those who dedicate themselves to hard work keep fighting even when they're exhausted. They keep going until they can't anymore. A person's true strength is revealed when they are exhausted. The lizard, in a state of confusion, tries to attack, but it's not enough. Rick says that true prodigies hone their skills with a lot of effort, and he has witnessed this in his friends. Heath always believed he was the strongest, but in fact, he only faced opponents he could beat. Geth ends up losing when he hears this, and then invokes the most powerful dragonoid magic, practically transforming himself into a dragon. Snape reveals that Geth has invoked the ancient blood of dragons, taking Rick by surprise with his power. He is shocked to see that his punch doesn't do any damage to the monster. It's as if Geth is made of metal, and his attacks are much faster. Geth was lucky enough to be born with this powerful body, so Rick realizes that he won't be able to beat him. Geth is pleased that Rick has realized this, but what Rick really wants to say is that at Angelica's current level, she can't beat a dragon. That doesn't mean Angelica should give up. She needs to keep training for the next time her life is on the line. Rick begins to add months of training to his regimen, slowly increasing his power. He releases 12 months of training and becomes too fast to be seen. Angelica admits that she hasn't reached that level yet, but realizes that Rick uses his wobbly feet technique in an advanced way. This makes her realize that this will be her strength if she continues her intense training for another year. Rick takes control of the fight and gives a few more lectures, explaining that ordinary hard work cannot overcome the difference and that innate abilities require a dose of madness to sustain extraordinary efforts. It's true that Angelica lost after training herself to exhaustion for a whole month, so he asks her if she'll be able to push herself to do the same intense training for a whole year, if it means she can win. Angelica remembers what Rick said about the regret scale, getting inspired and declaring that she was born with a scale that always weighs one way. Rick pats Geth on the back, questioning whether the lizard has what it takes to push himself in this current fight. Unfortunately, Geth hasn't learned anything, so Rick decides he'll have to finish the fight. He uses the wire bar, but it's not as precise as Angelica's. The attack still defeats Geth, and Rick says he's lucky he's not facing the Angelica he'll become in a year. Angelica feels confident that she can reach the level that Rick has shown her in a year, while Rick is declared the winner of their fight. Snape, surprisingly calm, is actually pleased to see Geth defeated. Geth ruined his career as a boxer so that Snape wouldn't feel bad about it. He lost a lot of money betting on Geth, and now he won't be able to marry Angelica. Angelica mocks him, but is surprised to see him accept defeat with dignity. Finally, it's time for the second match of the tournament, where Boston faces Kelvin, the 3-time champion. Braun is an opponent he defeated with just one punch. Kelvin quickly realizes how powerful Brune is, as he just stands there, not leaving a single opening. The fight begins, and Kelvin starts a flurry of punches, but the crowd gasps in astonishment as Braun pushes him back. Kelvin is excited, as Braun is the strongest opponent he has ever faced, but everyone is horrified when Geth returns to the arena, crazed by his dragon blood. The terrifying lizard tries to attack Kelvin, but Kelvin easily stops him and sends him flying. Geth's strength is at a high level, but Kelvin defeats him so easily that it makes our group wonder if he has reached a new level. Kelvin is disappointed to learn that his match has been postponed until the next day, but Broson says he sensed uncertainty in his attacks. Later, everyone goes to dinner and discusses that they need Braun or Rick to win to get the jewel. Rick isn't there because he ran a 700 kilometers race, and Angelica is no longer surprised by his crazy antics. Rick goes a long way out of town and finds Kelvin training. Rick thinks Kelvin should worry more about exhaustion before his fight against Braun, but he doesn't care. Instead, Kelvin wants to train with Rick, and Rick has no choice but to submit. He surprises Kelvin with his incredible speed, and Rick is amazed to see Kelvin dodge his punch, wondering why he was hit once during the tournament. Rick knows that Kelvin uses his strong sense of smell in combat, and wonders if his nose was blocked. Kelvin recognizes Rick's strength and decides to share his story. Kelvin grew up always looking forward to a fight, but eventually there was nothing he could call a fight. Things got better when he arrived at his gym, but there he started knocking everyone out in less than a minute with a single punch. Kelvin was upset to see that the fights had started to become boring again, but he thought it wasn't so bad, since Nick Fury was happy about it. For him, the only quest was to get stronger. One day, someone told Fury that the tournament was becoming boring because Kelvin was winning with a single punch. The man warned that Fury's academy would fail if people stopped caring about the fights, so he wanted Kelvin to start losing on purpose. Fury didn't care what he said and wouldn't have the courage to tell Kelvin to do it. Kelvin wanted to provoke the man who was already losing an eye, so he started fighting in such a way that everyone would think he was vulnerable. Since then, Kelvin has mixed bad fight days with good ones, so that the crowd loves to watch, and he's even won 3 times in a row. Kelvin now strives to make matches exciting and never takes a fight lightly. His battles draw large crowds to the city, and Fury's academy thrives. Rick apparently wasn't paying attention and only warns Kelvin not to underestimate Brune in the fight scheduled for the following day. The audience is informed that a defense spell has been cast over the combat area. The fight begins in the same way as before, but this time Kelvin uses a new move. Everyone is surprised to see that he rotates his arm at high speed, increasing the force of his blow, which is enough to deflect Braun's hand. However, Braun almost eliminates Kelvin with his counterattack. Kelvin is impressed, but Braun can't say the same. He notes that Kelvin isn't fighting seriously, but Kelvin wonders if Rick has revealed his plans. Brune just makes assumptions, while Kelvin admits that he's holding back for the sake of the audience. He recognizes that Braun is a real contender, but he can't fight seriously yet. If he does, everyone will realize that he's been holding back in his fights. Kelvin feels ashamed, but Braun praises him for putting others before himself. Braun is disappointed that he can't fight Kelvin with all his strength, but he can't change that, so he prepares to use the appropriate force in this situation. He states that he will only fight with 2 fingers and won't move an inch from his spot. It would be hypocritical of Kelvin to tell him to fight seriously, so he accepts the challenge. Brune pushes him a little, using only his fingers, and Kelvin realizes that this makes the fight more interesting. Everyone cheers for Kelvin, but some people comment that Braun is doing something clever. Kelvin thinks how much fun it would be to fight someone like Braun with all his strength, especially as there are so many attacks he wants to test. However, Kelvin finds himself in trouble, so Nick Fury shouts, revealing that he sees right through Kelvin. Fury knows that Kelvin is holding back, but he has always dreamed of training the strongest boxer in history. He wants Kelvin to become the strongest, and Kelvin wonders if that's what he really wants. So Kelvin decides to fight with all his might. He's never been so excited and tells Braun that there's no need to hold back any longer. Everyone is shocked when Brune stops Kelvin's all-out attack, but Kelvin points out that Braun had to use all 5 fingers to stop him. Kelvin wonders if it was an accident, but Braun replies that he's just using the right amount of force. Braun continues to block Kelvin's attacks, but Kelvin spots an opening. He ends up being thrown, but manages to twist around to avoid the impact. The 2 fighters meet in a big moment, but the crowd begins to realize that Kelvin has been fooling everyone all along. There's no turning back now, so Kelvin is determined to see this fight through and uses level 5 magic. Angelica observes and comments that people like him shouldn't be good with magic, indicating that he must have trained to his limits several times. Rick is incredibly impressed and concludes that Kelvin must be on the same level as Braun. Everyone is surprised and thoughtful, not knowing that Kelvin could use spells to block the attack. Kelvin closes the distance and prepares another spell, dodging Braun's attack and managing to trap the big man. Angelica expected nothing less from a champion, but Rick was still worried about something. Kelvin prepares for his next spell. Braun's teammates seem calm, but the crowd is in shock when Kelvin prepares to use level 8 magic. He creates a huge sphere of energy, and Rick is horrified to see the situation escalates. Angelica has never seen Rick like this before. He comments that Kelvin is much stronger than he imagined. The most terrifying thing, however, is that this means Braun will stop holding back. Brune frees himself from the trap and determines that Kelvin must be ready to receive his next attack. Kelvin's ball of energy grows bigger and bigger, and the audience is stunned when Brune uses his brute strength to interrupt the attack. Boston recognizes Kelvin's new determination, and everyone is perplexed to see that he signals a quarter of a thumb. This is a tradition in orc battles, signifying that the fighters will give up dodging and concentrate on exchanging blows. Rick is terrified to hear this, as it implies that Braun will attack non-stop throughout the fight. Kelvin feels a new emotion, wondering if this feeling is terror. Brune is so fast that Kelvin feels his sense of smell isn't helping him, and he is thrown backwards by the shockwave of Braun's punch. Kelvin tries to use several level 7 spells, but to no avail. Boston advances without hesitation, and everyone believes that Kelvin has exhausted himself after so many spells. When Brune lands a punch, Angelica thinks it was a direct hit, but Rick reveals that it was not. Kelvin used movements to avoid being destroyed. His bones and organs are shattered, but anyone else would have been defeated. He thinks about giving up, but he always wanted an opponent like Brune. This is the fight he's been looking for all his life, so determined, he gets up. Kelvin may be out of magic, but he refuses to give up and declares that he still has his physical strength. He unleashes a series of punches, but Rick knows it won't last. After so much damage, Kelvin collapses, surprised to realize that Brune really exists. The crowd begins to support Kelvin, who is moved by the applause. Even after fooling everyone for so long, he stands up again, and the crowd goes wild. Kelvin prepares for a final blow, with no magic and no strength, but says it's time to carve out his own spirit. He is engulfed in flames as he combines techniques and unleashes an incredible attack, everyone watching the impressive display of power. However, this attack doesn't affect Brune, who compliments Kelvin on his effort and questions whether he has used every last drop of energy. Kelvin laughs when he realizes that he can't move Brune, but says that this fight was the most fun of his life. He earns the respect of Brune, who returns the blow. Fury admits that Kelvin lost, but still considers him the greatest boxer in history. Kelvin collapses at the count, but the joy of the fight makes him smile, while the crowd celebrates Brune's victory. Angelica finds such a convincing victory against the champion incredible, but Brune notes that Kelvin was really impressive. Rick is optimistic, believing that they will now get the jewel, and all he needs to do is walk away. However, Brune interrupts him, revealing that he's looking forward to their fight. Rick senses great danger lurking and ends up losing a lot of hair due to the stress that consumes him. Elsewhere, Kelvin reads about his defeat and how he fooled everyone, feeling like a villain. Cyclops, on the other hand, believes that everything will be fine and is more interested in Kelvin's latest move, as he never knew he possessed such a powerful attack. Kelvin mentions that this change occurred because he was completely absorbed in the moment. However, he feels guilty for lying to everyone, and even more guilty for losing. Fury notes that he was being considerate, and reminds him that losing isn't the end of the world, as Kelvin can simply train harder and get stronger again. Kelvin wonders why Fury cares so much about him, and Cyclops explains that he sees Kelvin as a son. Brune interrupts the conversation and offers to treat Kelvin's wounds, but Kelvin refuses, preferring to feel the pain he hasn't experienced in a while. He also realizes that Rick was right to warn him about Brune's strength. Meanwhile, Rick is not doing well, having locked himself in his room. Angelica asks him to stop acting like a child, but Rick fears for his life. Snape appears to offer encouragement, but has to convince Rick to come out of hiding. He explains that everyone is excited to see the final, as it's the first time in a long time that there will be a new champion. Snape wants Rick to take part, but Rick replies that his life is more important than a tournament. Snape changes his approach, dramatically explaining that many people are counting on him for the success of the tournament, and a lot of money is at stake. If Rick doesn't want to risk his life, it will affect the dreams of many. Angelica reminds him that he can be revived, so dying shouldn't be a big problem for him. Rick, however, says that dying is scary. Angelica reminds him that he has endured years of training with Brune, so he shouldn't fear fighting a single match. Rick argues that training and fighting are different things, and that Angelica wouldn't understand. His words hurt Angelica, who realizes that she's been wrong about Rick all along. Mizette then wonders if Rick has realized how curious it is that Brune has a perfect training plan, prepared from day one. Rick believed that they were ready to train any ally they could find to defeat Kaiser. However, that wasn't the only reason, as Mizette reveals that Brune had always hoped to train someone with whom he could fight on an equal footing. He had felt isolated since childhood, dreaming of one day fighting someone who was his equal. Mizette is sure that Brune hopes his fight with Rick will fulfill that dream, and he wants Rick to take that into consideration. Alice Sarad also offers her opinions, and Rick remembers the moment he met Brune, being impressed by the strong handshake, realizing that Brune had no fighting experience and not the slightest magical ability. Rick assumed that Brune would tell him to give up being an adventurer, but was surprised to hear that he had to train much harder than someone with talent. Brune only questioned whether Rick was ready to endure such training. Angelica, irritated by Rick's attitude, wonders if Brune's training was really so terrifying. Mizette explains that it was a real hell and is amazed that Rick didn't go crazy during that period. How Rick managed to last more than 2 years is a mystery. Angelica is incredulous, considering that Rick has no abilities but decided to undergo grueling training at the age of 40. The others reveal that Rick does indeed possess an innate ability, but the requirement to activate it is complicated. His strength is not controllable, and it has a great impact on his body. Because of this, Brune has forbidden its use. Rick wonders if it's pathetic, but Rionette doesn't think so, but she says she'd like Rick even more if he fought for Brune's sake. The day of the final match finally arrives, and Snape is more nervous than anyone, fearing that Rick will decide to withdraw before the fight. Rick waits nearby and explains that he has overcome his fear. He has determined that all he needs to do is apply everything he has learned in training. Rick tries to act confident, but it's clear that he's still terrified in the arena. The announcer reveals a long list of rewards for the winner, and Rick is still terrified. Rionette then whispers something in his ear. Both fighters enter the arena, and Rick declares that he will give it his all. Brune expects this and instructs Rick to use everything he has taught him and give it back. No one has any idea who can win, as both are incredibly powerful, and the fight begins. Rick starts with the wobbly feet technique, but he's much faster than Angelica has ever seen. Eventually, he stops, and Brune is impressed to see that Rick has managed to make him bleed. Snape wonders what kind of magic is being used, but Angelica reveals that no magic has been used as the movements are too fast for Snape to see. The others explain that Brune blocked several blows, but Rick managed to wound him with the wire cut. The fight continues as Rick presses forward, but Brune pushes him back. Rick barely manages to dodge a devastating attack and lands another cut. Angelica is amazed by this level of fighting and wonders what Rionette told Rick. Rionette reveals that she asked Rick to take her on the trip to the hot springs that the winner of the tournament gets. Angelica is horrified to imagine that the two of them could become intimate, and Rionette doesn't deny it. Brune is delighted to see Rick fighting, and decides it would be discourteous not to do anything but defend, throwing a powerful punch, causing a stir in the audience. Kelvin is stunned to realize that Brune's punch has more power than level 5 magic. Rick knows he won't survive if he acts carelessly, and must dodge to save his life, while Brune unleashes a series of punches. Rick realizes that this was just a distraction, and Angelica is worried about him, but Rionette isn't anxious as she sees that Rick manages to avoid the attack. Everyone is stunned as Rick has used a simple level 1 magic technique to block Brune's incredibly powerful attack. What impresses Kelvin most is that Rick activated the magic without even stopping to gather his energy. Brune praises Rick for his precise magical control, since even he can't perform magic without pronouncing the spell's name first. Rick credits Alyssa and Mizette for his learning, but they claim that it's all the result of Rick's efforts. Using extraordinary speed, Rick hits another attack, but it doesn't have much effect, and Brune counters, making everyone believe that Rick is crazy for attacking directly. He ends up high in the air where Brune is most vulnerable, and it looks like the fight is coming to an end. But, surprisingly, Rick uses the same level 1 spell to throw a cushion of air under his feet and change direction. Rick executes a powerful aerial attack, but Brune remains unharmed. Angelica is terrified by his power, as his strength is incomprehensible. They belong to the realm of monsters, and it's clear that this is a battle between two S ranks. Rick can't believe that his aerial attack has had no effect, and determines that he needs to use it from a shorter distance. Brune is pleased to see that his training on Rick worked perfectly, but it was only possible because of Rick's mindset and emotion. He couldn't be happier to hear such words, but they are still the words a teacher would say to a student. Brune's dream is to fight someone on an equal footing, so Rick convinces himself that he hasn't done enough. Rick reveals that the others told him about Brune's dream, so the embarrassed Brune says that they exaggerated. Rick, however, doesn't believe him, as he has seen firsthand the passion Brune has shown in training him. Now Rick wants to repay Brune for all his efforts, and declares that he will fight with respect. Brune realizes how fortunate he is, as Rick has truly become a member of his group. He decides that this is the ideal time to talk about the past, specifically about how the Aurak Calcium Fist was founded. Looking back 46 years, when Brune was just 5 years old, it was at that moment that he realized that he was different from the other orcs in his pack. Apart from his appearance, Brune was much more intelligent than the others. He started reading books left behind by humans, while orcs usually communicated by fighting. Unfortunately, Brune was very strong, which prevented him from bonding with his kind. Determined to improve the orcs' lives, he taught them how to make fires and communicate in other ways. Over time, Brune became worshipped as a god, and no one else came close to him, not even his family. One day, on returning from a quest, Brune discovered that all the orcs had lost their lives in a flood. However, he felt nothing. It was just another painful reminder of his loneliness. One night, Brune was attacked by a human, who was shocked to see an orc reading and talking. Brune had eliminated a dragon terrorizing a town, but this man had been hired to kill an orc in the forest. Brune was no ordinary orc. The two discussed Brune's situation and how isolated he had become. Brune longed for a friend with whom he could fight on equal terms, but he didn't think he would find one. The man also had dreams and asked Brune to pursue them together, telling him that he had fought alongside the hero Yamato, becoming one of the legendary 5. He also wrote a book about Yamato's journey, revealing his desire to defeat Kaiser Al-Cid, aware of the audacity of this dream. The man believed that Brune was closer to realizing his dream than he had imagined. Brune agreed to travel with him, and so he became an adventurer, founding the Fist of Orichalco, as Reinhardt had predicted. People with power equal to Brune's gathered, all with unique abilities, but what they really craved was a fight like those between orcs. It was at this point that Brune drew up his training plan, but Mate doubted that there was anyone capable of surviving it. As time passed, Brune almost gave up on his dream, but eventually Rick appeared back in the present. Brune is ready to fight. Rick reflects on how Brune was by his side throughout his training, but never realized how much Brune devoted to him. Rick ponders the skills he can use, but doesn't feel comfortable fighting Brune like this, as Brune is looking for a straight fight. He remembers that he learned about the thumbs up gesture among orcs, a sign that the fighters would give up dodging and just exchange blows. Everyone is surprised when Rick shows Brune this gesture. He apologizes to Rionette, as he knows this means he won't be able to take her on the Hot Springs trip. Rionette is really pleased, as it's Rick's altruism that attracts her. Brune returns Rick's gesture, and the two begin to fight. The force of their punches causes massive damage that is felt throughout the arena as they exchange blows. Rick realizes that he owes it to Brune, who helped him pursue his dream. Mizette mentions that the situation is about to get even more dangerous, and he asks Alicette to lend him some magic. She agrees, and while he begins an incantation, Mizette teleports the entire audience to safety. Kelvin wonders why, and Mizette explains that the fight between Rick and Brune will result in an immense amount of damage. Everyone is outside, but they have no idea what's going on. Rick and Brune continue to attack each other, and everyone needs to prepare. Their analysis shows that Rick has managed to land more punches, but Brune is at a higher level in terms of strength per punch. The two warriors exchange serious blows, but Rick takes the brunt of the damage. He can barely stand up, but he refuses to give up, as he hasn't paid Brune back yet. The battle continues as they attack each other, and Brune laughs for the first time in this series. Eventually, Rick is sent into the walls of the arena and wonders if this is his limit. Exhausted, he believes the fight was good enough for someone like him. Rick hopes that Brune is satisfied, but realizes that his master can still fight harder. Rick's body doesn't respond, and he is surprised to realize that he can move a finger. Angelica assumes that Rick can't go on, but the others reveal that it's not over yet. They explain that Rick hasn't taken the fight seriously yet. Rick feels unable to be considered Brune's equal, especially since it was just a simple fight. However, he can't rest because this fight wasn't enough to repay Brune. Then Rick unleashes an incredible amount of power, and Rionette explains that he is using his innate ability, called the Reckless Soul. This power pours out of his body, and everyone celebrates, as their goal is to surprise Brune. Their intention was to help Brune realize his dream of fighting a worthy opponent. To do this, they gave Rick special training, keeping everything a secret from Brune. They helped him learn to control his innate ability and use it at will. The condition for activating the Reckless Soul is to be ready to exceed your limits when fighting someone much stronger. What Rick needs to activate it is not magical power or physical strength, but unwavering willpower. Powerful streams of energy emanate from his body, and Rionette declares that the real fight begins now. Rick, energized, resumes the battle, while all the spectators look on apprehensively. Brune is surprised by everyone's reaction and realizes that despite being focused on his goal, he didn't realize how much they cared about him. Finally, Brune recognizes that he now has friends and is no longer alone. The two warriors continue their fight, and Brune experiences for the first time the sensation of being pushed to the limit. The others observe that they have both exceeded their limits, and the next blow will decide everything. The two attack each other simultaneously, and both throw their final punch. No one can decide who won, but they soon discover that both are still getting up. Rick can barely speak, but recognizes how impressive Brune is. He explains that even after all the effort, he still hasn't managed to beat him. Rick faints, and Brune doesn't understand what he means. Rick reveals that they have reached this point because he decided to follow Brune's dream and give him a real fight. Brune declares that victory belongs to Rick, and also faints. When Rick wakes up after 3 days, he doesn't understand why he received the championship belt. Brune explains that it's because Rick won the fight. Rick is grateful, but knows he wouldn't have won if Brune hadn't used his healing ability on himself repeatedly. Brune doesn't want Rick to belittle himself, so he tells him that he's incredibly strong. He acknowledges the others and thanks them for being his friends. The group finally conquers the second of the 6 jewels, so they are one step closer to Yamato and Kaiser Alat. They also have a fake jewel to put on their belts. Rick wonders how old Reinhard is, since he fought alongside Yamato, but that was over 200 years ago. Reinhard's exact age is unknown, but his innate ability has prolonged his life. He was absent for a while, as the deadline for his book was approaching, and he was on the run. That night, Snape explains that Rick and Brune refused to win the tournament, and there can't be a default winner, so Kelvin becomes the champion again. Kelvin doesn't accept this decision, and Snape asks him to at least watch the belt. The group prepares to go home, but they all berate Rick for trying to bring back too much food. Brune thinks of Reinhard and hopes he can tell him that his dream has finally come true. Angelica also says goodbye, but Rick is surprised to hear that she's coming back because Brune has promised to train her. Rick can't believe she's willing to sacrifice her life. Angelica is determined to catch up with Rick and even surpass him. Rick says he plans to run home because he's a rank adventurer and starts late, but Angelica points out that he's very handsome. A lie. She assumes Rick will do his typical 500 kilometers training run, but is shocked when he says his home is 2,800 kilometers away. Angelica fears that her food will spoil in the carriage during the long journey, but Mazette uses enhancement magic to buff her horse. Rick is about to leave, but Rionette wants to know when he'll make the trip to the hot springs. Brune reminds Rick that he actually won the tournament, and Rick wonders what the trip would be like. He says he didn't really win, and Mazette agrees that it was a draw. Mazette suggests a race back home. If Rick loses, he'll have to make the trip to the hot springs, as well as 100 times the training. The race begins, but Rick falls behind, promising Rionette that he will take her to the springs one day. He doesn't want to do 100 times the training, so he starts running. As they run back, Rick reflects that, although it has taken time, his dream of becoming an adventurer has finally come true. But that's not the end of it. His next dream still awaits him, no matter how old he gets. If you like this video, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel to stay up to date with the next content. You won't want to miss a thing. See you next time.